My name is Theodore Anthony Mol. In Dutch, Theodorus Antonius Joseph Mol, M-O-L. I was born in The Hague, Netherlands, in March 10, 1936. I lived with my mother and dad, and my dad went into the resistance during the World War II in The Hague. During the resistance movement in 1944, we were raided by the Gestapo, and about 20 resistance people were incarcerated, basically my dad's whole group. We were transported to the local prison called the Hotel Orange. It's a major prison. It's still used now in Holland, and we spent there in a cell during the night. We heard people coming and going and executions taking place. Then I was with my mother in a cell. My dad was, I don't know where he was also in the building somewhere, but in a separate cell. So at a certain point in the middle of the night, we were taken out of our cell. My mother feared that we would be executed or something worse was going to happen. I was 8 years old at the time. So we went to the commander. It was in the middle of the night, the commander's office, and my mother said, "You don't have to drive us home, we can walk." He said, "You're not going home. You go to the concentration camp." And so in the middle of the night we were driven, oddly enough, by a Citroën, Gestapo Citroën, person car, to the camp. And we arrived there in the middle of the night, and we were thrown into what we call the bunker there. It was a bunker, was a cell with no light, no facilities, no nothing. And we spent there, and I have to recall, maybe 2 or 3 days in the bunker. And then we were released to the barracks outside, one of the barracks, and we were allowed to sleep in a bed there. And then after that, my mother was taken to the women's camp, and I was kind of left alone. Now, during the time we were in the camp, I was kind of allowed to roam the camp, to go to the various sections of the camp. And my mother had to work with the other women, and at night I would stay with her in the barracks. Kids were not allowed. A lot of kids were killed just prior to my arrival in the camp. I think 1,300 kids were taken away from the parents and sent to Germany, and they were basically all killed.
What percentage of the kids that were taken away were Jewish?
That I don't know. I can research that, of course. I have some papers and information on that, but okay. I don't know offhand. The camp had, like my parents were political prisoners, because actually my dad was Catholic, my mother was Protestant, and so we were designated as political prisoners. I had the run of the camp. I could go basically to any of these sections of the camp. There were about 5 sections, and they let me wander through the gates, so I had kind of time to roam around. One of the places that I visited was a big field stacked with airplanes. Believe it or not, big airplanes, old bombers that were shot down by the Germans. They were taken to this field, stacked up, and then all the intelligence was taken, see what instrumentation they had, what radios they had, blah blah blah. So I was playing in those planes at one time, and there were, and I don't want to go too much detail, but it sticks in my mind, there were the 2 poles there behind the pilot's area, and you put your feet on there and push a button, and it would take you into the gun turret, right? Everything was still active. I mean, the batteries were still charged. So I went up into the gun turret where the 50 caliber machine guns were. And luckily I didn't pull the trigger or anything like that. But suddenly a German came storming in. He said, "What are you doing here? Get out of here, And so he was pretty nice to me. He said, "Never come back here in this area again." And he said, "You want a bullet?" Okay, he took one of those 50 caliber bullets and took the bullet out and took the dynamite out or whatever you call it and put it back in. He said, "That's your souvenir. You can keep this." So I never went back there, of course, again. But otherwise I had to...
But you kept the bullet. You still have it?
Yeah, no. My mother hated it and she threw it away. Yeah. No, I don't have that. But so the camp had several sections. One section I was not allowed to go, which was kind of the crematoria where the people were burned, tortured, hanged, and the whole, So I was not allowed to go there.
Were you able to smell any of the burned people?
No,
Did you
no,
notice
no,
anything like?
no. They.
But you were aware that it was happening.
Yeah, I was
Even though
aware.
you were a young guy.
Yeah. Yeah, you get the and I was with another boy there that was 12 years old. I was 8 years old. He was 12, and we got a little bit of hint of what was going on. So we were not allowed to go, of course, in that building. Later on, after the war, but the camp was still not designated as a national monument. It was just locked up. I was allowed to go in and see what it actually was. This was in the 60s, mid-60s, 1960s. So that's a story by itself. My mother and I went to the camp after the war in 65 to see what's, to remember. And the camp was sealed off. Nothing was done. It was not a national monument yet. It was just sealed off. And we were standing there, and right next to the camp is a big army depot. It always has been an army depot. During the war, the Germans used it. After the war, the Dutch used it again. So we were standing there, and this staff car comes by with a high officer from the Dutch group, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And we gave him the story. He said, "Here's a whole bunch of keys. Why don't you help yourself? Go into the doors and go to the camp, and you can see for yourself." And so we were allowed to go into the camp and see how it was just left the way the Germans left it. There were still ashes in the oven, and I took a lot of pictures of it at the time, which I'm still trying to find, but I have pictures of it. And so we saw actually that building that I was not allowed to go was basically, let's say, like a middle age and torture place.
Like a torture chamber.
Yeah. It was a big area. You had a granite table, which had a form of a human being, with the arms and so on, and they would put persons on there and either smash the arms, or after they were executed, they would, do whatever they did before they burned them. There was also a door like you see now in banks. You have a big a vault with like a foot thick door, except they had a door and in the wall that was maybe about a foot deep, and the door was like a big vault door, and they would put a person in there and smash the door, close the door, so all the bones in his body, a person's body, would be broken and smashed and so on.
They put them in while the person was alive.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then close the door, and that there was no room. They just broke every part in your body, So that was there. And then they had the ash pits where they put the ashes of the people that were in the crematorium. There were gallows. But that building had never been in until after the war. During the war they didn't let me go in there, of course, which kind of consideration, I guess. But and then I also had access to the workshops where prisoners were working on street signs for the Germans, because they had street signs that the Germans could read And so they were painting street signs and did some carpentry work and so on. And while I was there, I met a person there that was a painter, a professional painter. And he painted my portrait on a piece of plywood, which I still have. And he could never finish it because the camp was eliminated when the Allies were approaching. So, but I took the unfinished painting with me, and he signed it on the back. And so I have that still in my possession. My dad was in the camp there too. He didn't know we were there, but since I could roam around, I went to that fence there, and he suddenly saw me. And, you know, he was really devastated. My mother said later on that, you know, he must have been really devastated because he thought that we were safe at home, you know. He didn't know my mother and I were in the camp. So, but anyway, he was executed in September, I think September 3rd, if I'm right, or 4th, 3rd, and right there with a lot of other people.
What year would that have been?
That is 1944.
1944.
Just before the Allies were, you know, encroaching onto the part of Holland, you know. So the Germans had to withdraw to Germany. Of course, it was all wasted because we were occupied for another year, you know. I mean, the Allies stopped in the Ardennes and so on. I mean, there was a slowdown before they moved into the area. So my mother and I were released, believe it or not, from the camp with an official letter from you were left in good health and blah, 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 signed by the SS. And I have those papers too, one from my mother,
Were there
one
many
from
people
me.
that were released at that time?
No, I think about 23. 23.
Small
What is
group.
the name of the camp?
Vught, V-U-G-H-T. It's right on the, it's not well known, but it was just as deadly, and it was right on the German border. But in Holland, but just on the Dutch side of the German border. So a lot of people got killed there. My mother, fortunately, was allowed to work in a little shop run by Philips company. Philips company is a big electronics company in Holland. And they got permission from the Germans, or the Germans asked them to use the prisoner workforce to make radios for the Stukas, for the planes. So my mother had a job there. She got paid by a slice of bread with food, some food, and every time she came to me and shared it with me, so we had some good food, you know, for a while. But so she worked in that workshop there for a while, making coils, and she always said, well, I put an extra winding on it, or, you know, to screw it up, you know, so the frequency would be wrong or whatever it was, you know. So, but anyway, I was too young to be left alone and kicked out of the camp. So the Germans probably said, well, send the mother with him. So that's my, thinking that happened, you know. And then the camp was abandoned basically at that time.
Okay.
So when we came home, our house was plundered by the Germans in the first place. Everything was gone, you know, anything of value, and then was plundered by the people too, which you couldn't blame. People were starving and, you know, had nothing, so they looked for anything. Blankets. We had no blankets, no nothing. I got a horse blanket, which I still have, used on horses. That was my blanket, you know. And we had the worst winter of all things in 1944, 1945. In Holland was one of the worst winters. You know, very cold, snowy, and there was no food. And luckily at that time the Allies owned the skies, so we had bombers coming over, going to Germany for bombing, you know.
The liberators.
Liberators.
The liberators were what? Americans?
No, at the end of the war we were liberated by the Canadians. But the planes came over were Allied planes, big bombers, and they flew so low, some of them flew so low that the pilots would throw candy out of the windows, out of the cockpit, and also pamphlets. I still have 4 or 5 pamphlets. If you picked them up, you were shot. But I was a little kid, and I managed to pick up some of those pamphlets. The pamphlets showed what the world status was, you know, that they were advancing in the Ardennes and this and that. Of course, the Germans didn't want to have anybody pick up and get to know that. But I have some of those, and those were thrown out of the plane too.
But the Germans were there at that time.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
they were there. Yeah, I picked it up. Yeah, I don't know. I could have been grabbed, and there was a little kid that was. That's also the atrocities of the Germans there. A German was killed. I don't know how he got killed, or if he was drunk or he got killed. But anyway, they found the body of a German. So they grabbed the first 10 people they could get, and they were going to shoot him. And one of the people was a 10-year-old kid. And he was going to be executed too, right against the wall there. And the father, of course my mother told me later, the father came over and said, shoot me, let my kid go. But they didn't. So they shot the kid too. Today there's a plaque there still, with the name of the kid and so on. He was 10 years old. So I was just running around there and did some mischief with the they tried to tease the Germans and so on. So luckily nobody, we didn't get shot or anything like that. So we survived that, But and then we were liberated by the Canadians.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would ride on one of the tanks, that went to the beach, not too far. It's about 5 miles from where we lived. Was the beach, and the beach was all armed, with anti-tank stuff and so on and so on. So it was also fully mined, a lot of mines. So they had the Germans. They forced the Germans to dig out the mines. And when they were finished, so-called finished, they said, "Okay, you guys run up and down the beach now."
It was safe.
to make it safe, yeah. So I never forget that. And the Canadians were kind of pot shooting seagulls or something, and I had my hand under the rifle and got the cartridges. That was a big deal. They also gave me chewing gum, and I remember a package of Lucky Strike, the cigarettes.
You were not a smoker.
I was a young smoker. I started
Oh, you
smoking
were?
very early. Yeah. But I quit too. So, but I was smoking when I was, maybe 10 or 12 years old. I was smoking. But so we were liberated. But we had nothing in the house. We had the worst winter. Fortunately, my dad, when the war started in 1940, because we were surprised that the Germans invaded Holland, because we said we would be neutral. And we were neutral in the First World War, so we assumed we'll be okay. And we took care of a lot of the German kids because they were in poverty and hungry. They were sent to the farmers in Holland. They were, got good food and so on for 3-4 months, and then went back to Germany. So we had good relations in a way with the German people. Still, they invaded us right away, and some family members on my wife's side were killed as soldiers in Holland. We had no air force, but we had one weapon in Holland that was blowing up all the levees, the dikes, which would flood all the meadows and so on. So the heavy panzers from the Germans, which was all heavy stuff, got stuck in the mud. That was our weapon. But unfortunately we had no air force. So what they did was they saturated bombed Rotterdam, one of the major cities in Holland. They bombed it fully. I don't know how many people got killed, but lots of people. And they say we will do city after city unless you surrender. And so the Dutch government surrendered. Of course, I remember little bits of things, but I was very young. My mother filled me in later on the details and that's what was going on. But and then we had a quiet period, kind of, for a year or so. The Germans, they reinstalled the original government in Holland and so on. So they left the people alone pretty well. It was after 41 or so that they became fanatic. So the Jewish people had to wear a star and so on and so on. You got more and more that you were being stopped on the road and had to show who you were and what you were and this and that. So my dad, at the day of the invasion, he went to the store. You can call it like a Safeway here, a store like that, and he went there and got a big box of condensed milk, and he got a whole box of sardines he bought. And he took that home, and we put that in a secret place in the house, where he also later on used the papers and so on, from the resistance group. But he put that in there. So when we came back from the concentration camp and the house was completely ransacked and we had nothing, my mother remembered that we had that. So we had a can of sardines every week. We ate one sardine a day, maybe, and we had, some condensed milk. And then the rest there was no food. My mother went on the bike, like so many people did, to the countryside to dig for potatoes in the field or find some food, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But often when you came back to the city, the Germans would take all your food away. Yeah, they would just, even the little bit that you had, So we hardly had any food. We had sugar beets, that was about it, So how you survived, I don't know.
But the Germans gave you nothing. They didn't give you no food.
No. But the interesting thing is, one day, my mother found a package on the street, and she put it under in the coat, not knowing what it was. So she opened it up later on, and it was a piece of meat,
wow,
pork, whatever it was, but already wiggling, I mean, just spoiled. But she asked somebody that was a butcher before. She said, "I have this. What can I do with it?" He said, "Just boil it. Get the fat out of it." Great. He said, "That's okay, So she did that, and we had gravy for a long time, a real gravy,
wow,
fat, So I remember that happened, So, but we survived barely. People were dying in the streets and in the hallways and so on. There was no food. And and we had the worst winter that time, 44, 45. So
okay.
It got so bad that the Germans at a certain point allowed the Allies to do a food drop. And so they had these thousands of bombers coming over, and they flew over soccer fields, and they opened the bomb bays, and they dropped all kind of canned food, pork and whatever. The picture somewhere that can be shown that have mountains of cans, spam and this and that, to feed the people, and the Germans allowed that because people were starving. So at a certain point they said that enough is enough, I guess. The Red Cross did it, but so we had these food drops, so everybody got a little bit of food, good food, But otherwise there was nothing.
What year would that have been? When they were dropping food?
That was just the 44, the worst winter,
and during the winter.
Yeah. And the soccer fields and everything, there were no parachutes. It's just the plane flew so low, they opened the bomb bays, and all the food dropped out. Just piles of cans, all dented and so. Who cared, So, but it was good food, mainly spam. I remember things like that. And then in the spring of 45, we were liberated in May 45. So, but the spring of 45, we also the Red Cross was allowed to come in and distribute some bread. We got some loaves of bread and so on. So because people were still starving and so on, so the Red Cross did that. But when the Allies approached the Rhine or the liberation of Holland, they basically stopped. The Germans were evacuating. That was why the camp was evacuated too. They were evacuating the cities. They were hightailing it out. But then the Allies stopped, with the advance, and then the Germans came back, and some people had flags out already, and they would stand in their, they had these motorbikes with the sight thing, and they would stand there with a machine gun, and shoot those, flags out. People had the flags out. We were in for another year of occupation, right? Because you had the Ardennes, and so on. It stagnated, for a while. So the Germans came basically back, and then basically surrendered in May.
So they came back in 45, the beginning of 45?
44.
Yeah, 44.
Latter part of 44, yeah.
Okay.
Because that was why the camp was vacated too. The Allies were encroaching on. the Germans thought, oh, they're going to take Holland in 1944, run it over.
Right.
But they stopped. It stagnated in the Ardennes and so on, and it took another year before they.
So when it was stagnated, the Germans came back.
Oh yeah, with a vengeance. They know
Wow.
they had lost.
Wow.
So I mean, they were fanatic, and but we owned the air. I mean, the Allies owned the air, and that was good. And we saw these bombing runs to Germany. The sky was just black of planes, just going and going, and then
Must have been noisy.
oh
to hear
yeah,
that.
and then coming back, they had the stragglers, the planes that were hit. We had some planes that tried to make it to the North Sea. We were right on the North Sea, where English ships were waiting, and the planes tried to ditch there so they would be rescued. But so there were stragglers, and one plane, I never forget that. I was in the street, and this plane comes over rather low, and underneath us dangling a bomb, dangling. The bombs, I guess, had two hooks, and they drop them, but one must have failed, and there was this bomb dangling on you could clearly see it, and a person, I was kind of young, staring at it, and he said, come here, let's go in this hallway. And we went in this hallway, and we were just a seconds there, and we see that the bomb come loose. And it fell right in the backyard of where we were. And it was so weird. The houses across the street, the windows popped out. You know what I mean? I'll never forget it. But the bomb was behind us, so we were shielded by about two houses and the yard. So we were safe. But the compression of the air, I guess, knocked all these windows. And it was so weird because these windows just pop out like they didn't crack. They just like the whole thing just came out. I never forget that. So we were saved by a hair there, It's just, but the Allies owned the air, and they also had strafing runs because sometimes you had a German car going in the street, and you almost didn't hear it. But this fighter plane would come in from the RAF or from the Allies, and would strafe the staff cars or whatever military cars, and they would fly almost street level, pull up, But they owned the air, so that was very important. So we were saved by the Red Cross with bread in the spring of '44, and by the food drops for the Allies. Because things got so bad, I think even the Germans relented on that. Because we had about maybe at the time 400,000 or 500,000 people in the city and no food. So you can imagine what happens.
So the Germans didn't evacuate. They didn't leave completely.
No, they left for a short while. People flagged out, and then the Ardennes or whatever it was, it stalled. The offensive stalled, and they came back. And they were just they were pissed.
Okay.
And the people had the flags out, so they were more. They were worse than ever. So. But we survived. We had these sardines a little bit, and we had a little bit of condensed milk, and odds and ends. You don't know how we survived. But I had one blanket, which I still have here with me, a horse blanket. That was it.
That kept you warm.
Yeah, and you had to cuddle up, and that was the only way. And my teddy bear. Yeah, my teddy bear.
I'm going to ask you about that a little later. So let's back up a little bit. I wanted to ask you about your father's family or your mother's family. What you remember, or do you remember? Were there any Jewish people in town that you knew of? Was there a synagogue or?
Yeah, we had a synagogue very close by.
There was a synagogue.
Oh yeah, it's still there. It's basically still
when
there.
you were in school, did you have some Jewish students?
There was no school at the time. No school.
No, but you remember there was a synagogue, so the Jewish population was a small one.
My family knew Jewish people. Yeah, I know that, but I don't recall Actually, neighbors of ours were Jewish, and my dad urged them to flee. He would help them with the papers and so on. But they say, oh, it can be so bad, and they had to put a star on. They said, oh, we don't want to run the risk of being arrested or caught and so on. And they perished too. They were, you had at a certain point, they went to all the homes. They would block off streets and go into the homes. and find out if you're Catholic or Protestant or Jewish or this or that. And if you were Jewish, you were taken out, and basically taken to the camps, Also, young men were taken, young men for,
Where were the camps? They were, how far? They were in town.
Well, they had the initial camps that used soccer fields.
Where they did the killings. I mean, they did them in the camps.
No, some of the killings were done in the dunes. We were near the ocean there. We had dunes there, and the main prison was there, and people would be executed there. The prison, the same prison we were.
Yeah.
For about 3 days or 4 days. But all the other executions were normally done in the camps, off-site more or less, if you want to call it that way. So people were rounded up and put in, you have seen the boxcars, and the train, and just taken wherever, and not to be seen again. We had a lot of Jewish friends, but, I don't recall. I remember the neighbors were Jewish, and they had 2 girls, I think, were Jewish. Vaguely remember them. But, they were persecuted. Like I say, the first year of occupation was kind of mild, and then it got more and more fanatic, after that, So the Jews had to wear the star, then they were rounded up, and so on and so on. One of my cousins, they were also looking for younger people and talk about 14 years old, 15 years old, or something like that, to be incarcerated in the German army or so, sent to the Russian front, or for whatever reason, round up young people, for some reason. Maybe try to convert them or use them as what we call cannon fodder, expendables. My cousin was home with his brother, and his brother was like 15 or 17 in that range, and they blocked off the street. And they go from house to house and so on. So the younger brother opened the door, and the Germans came in, and they basically said, "Do you have anybody here that basically can use?" He said, "Yeah, my brother here." But his brother jumped in bed, and he said, "Oh, he has terrible disease like diphtheria or something like that." And they said, "Oh God, no." So he was laying there, Of course, he was fine, and they left him alone. So he survived. He could have been taken,
Yeah.
So little things like that can make a hell of a difference, But he was. Now the family. My dad had 2 sisters, and they survived. And his father he died in 1944. I remember it was one of the worst times, of course, but he died in 1944 of old age. I think he was in the high 80s. So, but he was very, very active. If a German car would go by, he took his walk stick and he said, yeah. And my mother said, "Don't do that, they're going to shoot you, And the Germans would just laugh at the old fart, But my mother, would say, "Oh, they grab us too, but So, but he was a good guy. Got to know him a little bit, and. He was a very good man, So, but anyway, so that's how he survived. After the war, we didn't know what happened to my dad, and you had several soothsayers that say, "Oh, he's in Switzerland," or "He was taking this." My mother went to palm readers and so on, but it took a little while for the Red Cross to find out that he was executed in the concentration camp in Vught. As a partisan. And the monument where his name is on also has about 20 names of this resistance group. All the people that were in the same group were all in the same bunch, and they were all executed at the same time, basically. So, so she got the information. She also got a visit by the director of the airplane company. It's called Fokker. Yeah. He was a director of it, and he was a bedmate there of my dad, and he survived. So he came to my mother's house, and he had farewell letters from my dad. My dad knew he was going to get killed, so he penciled, with aniline pencil, it's still well preserved, on paper, toilet paper, and so on, farewell letters, which I still have.
Oh wow, that is something.
Yeah, it's sad.
So tell me
Now
about
the thing is,
Go ahead.
he made the letters and I have them, but to date I still have not been able to read it.
Wait, say that again?
I have not been able to read him. I can't get to read him. I started crying.
Wow, it's an emotional.
Yeah. So I still have them in the vault and they're well readable.
Wow.
I have to do that one of these days, or somebody has to do it.
Wow.
So that is basically, the.
Hey, tell me a little bit about coming to America. When you came to America.
Oh.
And,
Well,
when you were married, and a little bit about your life when you
my
left.
normal life.
Yes, your life when you left Holland. And where did you leave from?
Well, I lived in The Hague. I went to a radio school. I wound up being an engineer anyway later on. But I went to radio school in The Hague, my hometown, and studied there for a couple of years and made some friends. And one of my friends there too, we had a draft, a military draft in The Hague. We had military draft. So both my friend and I were drafted, but we had to still do an exam. So we were given 2 or 3 weeks before we had to report to the military so we could do the exam. So
to be drafted, you have to be what age?
At that time, I think it was 17, 18, that range.
Okay.
So anyway, we were drafted, and we went to a city called Nijmegen, which was the place where the military were for Air Force military personnel was created. So we spent, everybody got 3 months basic training, which was like Marine training. So we had, both my friend and I were there, and we were, of all luck, we were transferred after the initial training to my hometown, The Hague, to a little airfield near The Hague. And that field was just used for gliders and so on, just a small field. But they decided to make that a strategic Air Force base. So my friend and I were one of the first to be stationed just about a few miles from my hometown, at that Air Force base. And we spent there 2 years. It went from nothing to full operational squadrons, Super Sabres at the time, American, were there, Americans there. So we fraternized a lot with the Americans in the drinks and so on. And so it came to pass that they said, well, they were from Oakland, I think, Oakland, California. They said, if you leave the Air Force, we want you to come work for us, and to my friend and me. And so when we left the Air Force, we didn't think too much about it. We both got a job. We started working as radio technical people at big stores and so on. And then suddenly I got a call in the middle of the night from California. This was the American, he said, and he spoke Dutch too. He said, where in the hell are you? Are you guys still in the... No, he said, we are, dismissed. We did our job. He said, why don't you come to the United States, Okay. And my good friend too, I told him, he said, are you going? He said, well, I said, yeah, I guess so. So I went to the American embassy and I got my papers. Everything was click, 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 because I had an affidavit of support. Somebody was waiting, somebody was taking, because you had to have a sponsor, somebody that would pay for at least 3 months in the United States. And, so my friend was jealous. He said, boy, I wish I could go too. He said, hey, I have an aunt in Hollywood, living somewhere in Hollywood. So he checked with his parents, and they found basically the address, and he was able to contact this lady in Hollywood that was relative to his family. And he said, I'd like to come to the United States, my friend is going. And she said, yeah, I will do that. I will be a sponsor. We wound up on the same ship. We left on the same ship. So we went from Rotterdam to New York, and in New York we were going to take a plane to San Francisco. And we arrived there in New York. We had hardly any money left. We got only $50. We were only allowed $50 or something like that. So we had maybe $10 left. But we had the plane, was all reserved already and paid for. But the ship was 2 days late in port. We had enormous bad weather. It was in March, which is really bad in the North Sea. So even it was a big passenger ship, we called the Maasdam from Holland American Line, we were tossed and turned, and we came 2 days late in New York. Plane was gone, right? The plane was gone. But there was another flight to San Francisco, but it was like $10 more. Yeah, as though the times things were cheap, you know. But we had a choice to stay in New York, which you couldn't afford anyway. We had maybe $10 each. You know, you can stay in a hotel or motel, or they said you can take this flight and it's $10 more. So we paid that, so we could go the same day to San Francisco. So we flew one of the first 707s. It was a 707, yeah, roomy, had little tables with lights on it. Bar in the back. Yeah. I mean, completely different from nowadays. So we arrived in San Francisco. He had to go to Los Angeles eventually, but we both came into San Francisco, and I had to call my sponsor, the guy that I knew from the Air Force and so on. He lived in Oakland, which is just across the bay from San Francisco. He said, "Oh, you arrived? Okay, we'll pick you up, yeah." But we had no idea of distances, so yeah. Like an hour and a half later, he was still not there. He said, "Oh God, what do we do?" We sat on a little bench there. I never forget that bench there in the airport. We sat there together and said, "Kind of, oh God, you know what are we going to do?" You know.
That was in Oakland.
That was in San Francisco Airport.
Oh.
Yeah, and for years they had that bench there, and every time I passed the bench, I said, "Oh God, I remember that." Yeah. So finally he showed up, and he took us both to his house in Oakland, and. It was on a Friday, I think, that we arrived. Monday, I had to start working already because he was the director of the operations that hired me, basically. So he said, Monday you start working in Oakland. My friend was allowed to stay. He said, let me show you the city before you go to Los Angeles. So I was jealous because I had to start working, and he was giving the grand tour, of the city. And then they put him on the Greyhound bus to Los Angeles, to his aunt there that was a sponsor. So, but we kept in close contact, of course. We always traveled back and forth. The family knew each other, the mothers, and so on. So, unfortunately, he died recently. So we went to the funeral. But so there's quite a anxiety there too, Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about when you met your wife and just getting married and. Bring us up to date.
Well, I was married twice. So my first marriage, with the divorce, I had my daughter with the first marriage. Okay. And then I was single for a while and dating and all that stuff, But then I met Ingrid through a friend. One of the buyers of the companies that I did business with was a Dutchman. And he said, I have a party tonight. I forgot, for a birthday or party. He said, come over. A lot of Dutchies coming over there, I said, okay. So I came there, and there I met Ingrid, because she was invited too. As a Dutchie, they knew her. It's like a three-way thing. So I met her, and before you know it, we were doing the dishes together there. And, and the interesting thing was, a week later, I was scheduled to go to Holland to visit my mother. My mother was still alone in Holland. So I promised her, I said, at least once a year I come and visit you. But so I had reservations on a flight to Holland. And my girlfriend that I met there at the party also had a flight to Holland. Same flight. So that was destiny. Huh?
Yeah.
I should actually back up. That was my second wife. Okay, the first one I divorced, and so. But then I had a period of quietness, and then So we were on the same flight.
Okay.
And she met my mother, of course, and I met her family, and the rest was history, right? Of course, we dated a long time, and then she had 2 daughters. One still lives in Holland, one lives here, and we eventually got married, and and we're still married. A good marriage, very good.
Good.
So that's how life progresses.
So the
I
work
guess.
you were doing when you
Ah.
the job that you had when you came to America was as an engineer.
Yeah, I did. Interesting enough, I worked for several electronics companies, but the initial one was they made electronic starters for military equipment, like in Alaska. I mean, you have to start a car or a tank or a truck,
Yeah.
So they needed a special starter. I worked on that, and then I did all kind of designs, amplifier design, because it was just in the period that the glass tubes went out and we got solid state, transistors, you know what I mean? So it was just in that transition period. So I got a lot of assignments to convert existing equipment to solid state equipment, which make it smaller, more reliable, cooler, and all that stuff. Your tubes, they go out, and every time, the solid state was good. So I worked quite a bit with Motorola. That's interesting enough. I wind up in Phoenix here, but I used to fly quite a bit to Motorola because they supplied most of the semiconductors for us. I did basically design and so forth. We also designed an intercom for the submarines. The first atomic submarine, the Nautilus. They're on the belt, little communicators that if the crew could communicate with each other on the ship. You know what I mean? Also solid state. So I designed that. So interesting enough, I was not a citizen yet, and they said, "You worked on this, top secret thing, Well, in no time I was a citizen, right? They took me to and sworn in and blah blah blah. So it was just a formality, but it was kind of interesting. So I went from company to company. I worked for a lot of defense contractors. I worked on ICBM missiles. I worked also for Lockheed. Various projects and so on. Very, very versatile life. Then the Beacon was.
How long have you been in Phoenix?
Well, we were off and on in Phoenix because Ingrid's mother moved to Phoenix from Los Angeles, and she bought a house, and so we came regularly from the Bay Area, and went here, but I was still working in the Bay Area. And then Ingrid got a job here because she's basically assistant to doctors, so she could easily get a job here. So she lives a little bit with her mother, and her mother she had a big new house, and she said it's too big for me, so I'm going to sell it. So a real estate agent, would sell it, and it turned out that they clicked it with her mother, and the rest is history. They're still married. But they had this house, and so we used that. I still had my big house in Belmont, California, and so I drove back and forth and jobs back and forth. But eventually, I sold the house there, and we bought the house from her mother. Her mother went to a smaller home, and where she still lives with her husband, and we took the house that she originally bought. And we lived there for a long time, and then about 10 years ago we moved to Stetson Hills to a new house, new build. So that's basically what happened.
Interesting story. You have an interesting story. I'd like to back up, and maybe we could talk about that little bear that you're holding.
Oh yeah,
and maybe you could tell me a little bit about that, and then I'd like to get some pictures of your the
family
that you talked about earlier, and your mom and dad.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. Okay, the bear.
Let's tell me a little bit about the bear.
The bear I got when I was born, so it was 1936 when I was born.
Yep.
And the bear has always been with me. I was allowed to take it with me to the camp, concentration camp, and the bear always stayed with me. It was a lot of comfort to me. And when I left, of course, the bear was with me and always has been with me. So it looks a little ragged, but from hugging and sucking on his ears, I guess, and so on. But
so that little bear would be your age.
Yeah, right. It would be exactly my age. Yeah. And they still make teddy bears like that, but he or she is the original, you know.
I noticed that the shape of that bear's head is different than the little ones that I see
Yeah.
that they're currently selling.
She has been kissed, of course, quite a bit and hugged and so on, but I don't know his original.
Good looking bear.
Yeah, thank you.
See, maybe you could show a picture of the painting that.
Yeah.
Maybe you could hold it up a little bit. Talk a little bit about it.
Sure.
Let me get it in here. Oh yeah.
Works, huh?
Hold it. Okay. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the painting, just a little bit.
Okay, the painting is has a lot of history by itself. I was in the camp, and one of the sections of the camp was the workplace for carpenters and painters and so on, for maintenance of the camp and for the German signage and so on, for on the roads and so on. So you had people that just painting and carpenters and so on. One of the persons there was an actual painter, a portrait painter. He said, "Oh, I like to paint your portrait." So I said, okay. So he started painting the portrait on plywood. This is just plywood, rough plywood, and very crude paints. Remember, these are paints that for road signs, not for paintings. So he had crude paints, and he got this far. I remember my coat and my shirt. I had this on forever, I guess, and then we came to the point that the camp was being vacated. We had that suddenly vacation. My mother and I were released. People were executed or put on trains to Germany. The camp was vacated. So he never finished the painting. This is as far as he got, because there are other paintings from him in the museum of the camp that are a little more finished. You know what I mean? Finished look. And of course, the paint here is very crude. Now, the interesting part of this painting is that when I went to the United States and got my first job, or actually my second job, I worked for an engineering manager, and the engineering manager was German. His name was Wolfgang, and we bonded real fast. Interesting enough, his history was that he was a Messerschmitt pilot, a German pilot, and he was shot down over Brugge, over the Belgian coast, when the British were vacating Europe, going back to England, because the Germans were approaching. And so they had these battles on the beaches there, and they managed to get on a lot of ships, fishing boats and all kind of ships, to go back to England. And the Messerschmitts, were strafing the beach. He was shot down, and he survived. I mean, the British should have killed him. I mean, at the time, because they were strafing these people on the beach. They had no cover. So, but he survived. Prisoner of war. And he went to England, and he had a very good life there, because he went with families to farms there and got well fed and so on. It was nothing like a German prison camp. You know where it was made, in the camp and so on, by somebody in a workshop there, painting signs, but he was also an artist.
Yes.
He was from Belgium. Later on I found out he died in the 80s. He was a kind of famous painter in Belgium. And his name, I have it right here, was Spiegele. L. van Spiegele. Spiegele. I think the first name was Louis, with L van Spiegele. So I
will look it up.
Yeah, look it up. And I think he died in the 80s, and too bad I could not connect with him, because it would have been good. But the paint is, of course, very good paint. Now, the story is that I came to the United States, and I worked for this German, my manager was German, the Luftwaffe pilot. And it turned out he was also a painter. And so I got to talk to him, and he was very nice. I mean, we had no grudges whatsoever. And he said, "Let me finish this painting. Let me put a protective coating on the front and the back and put a frame around it." So he framed this. It's kind of interesting that the that this happened. This is framed by a Luftwaffe pilot. So, but that's really what happened, and the painting, of course, is not in finished form, but close enough. This is how I looked. I remember myself a little bit, looked in the clothes and so on that I had. I don't look very, that I was very hungry or so, because I got food from here and there, even from the Ausarine, the German, women and so on. They would give me sometimes snacks or a Red Cross package that nobody claimed. And so I got, some substance of food, and my mother brought some food from the workshop from Philips.
Hey, that's good. Now maybe we could take a look at your.
My dad.
Yep. Maybe you could hold that picture.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
You could talk about that picture of your dad, or talk about your dad.
Yeah, I of course I got to know him only till I was 8 years old, right? So. But he worked originally for an American company called, I think, Amilco, Amilco. I actually have to research that if it still exists or not. But he worked in Holland. He met my mother while he was working there. We moved to The Hague, and he worked, when I got to know him better, he worked for the employment office in The Hague. I don't know how you call it here, but it's a government office for employment,
What was his name?
My dad's name? Franciscus Cornelis Paulus Mol. FCP Mol. Franciscus Cornelis. We use a lot of Latin names. Franciscus Cornelis Paulus Mol. Which is, he was Catholic, of course, Paulus and so on. The Apostle Paulus and so on. So he worked for the bureau, like Social Security here, and he was one of the directors there, and he was in that position. He was able to falsify a lot of documents, especially Jewish people. They got a work assignment in Switzerland or Portugal, neutral countries or something, and he made out all the papers for them, and they went on the train. And
so he did save some Jewish.
Oh, he
families.
he saved.
How many? Do you have any idea how many he might have saved? Hundreds.
Yeah, he was. Especially because he worked in that employment office. He got
had
a lot of rotation of people. So quantize, I could not.
But he did save a number of.
Oh yeah, a lot of them actually. My mother said he did a lot because he was in the position to falsify the papers. Oh, they have a job, or they had a job right near the Swiss border, or so they could flee over. So they could move, because of course they could not take anything with them. Just what clothes on the line, whatever, the houses and everything they had to abandon. But was well worth it. And then he had a lot of Jewish people that said, they won't do anything to us. We don't want to run the risk. Oh, we have to wear a star. Okay, that's fine. So my dad and my mother said too, they tried to get him out of the country, but they didn't want to. Some of them didn't want to.
They were unaware of the danger that was
they thought,
coming.
the Germans would not be that cruel.
Maybe you could show a picture of your mom and you as a little guy.
This, I don't know the date exactly.
Hold it a little closer to your chest.
After the war.
Yeah, this is after the war, and I don't know the exact date.
You could look at it a little bit. Yep.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let me get that shot.
And I don't even know how old I was. Probably about 10 or 12. I guess.
That's it. Just look down at the picture a little bit. And keep talking. Okay.
So anyway, we looked pretty good. So this is after the war, and we were alone. The house was ransacked by the Germans and by civilians as well. Which can blame them. They were looking for anything to keep warm or whatever.
Name?
My mother was Geertruide Maria. Geertruide Maria Karels. Karels was her maiden name, Karels. And Geertruide Maria. And they call it Truus. Truus. That was the short name for Truus. Geertruida in Holland you call Truus. And German is like Gertrude, I guess, or something like that, you know. But and so she after the war she helped my dad, of course, during the resistance and so on. When the Germans invaded our house, occupied our house, she managed to take some of the papers and stamps that they had to flush them through the toilet.
Wow.
So she got rid of a lot of evidence. Yeah. You want me
Did it
to?
ring? You could take the phone off the hook.
So anyway, so he did a lot of work for the Jewish people, and my mother, of course, the Gestapo came in the house. They showed a gun on our noses and so on, and anybody that came at the door. That's interesting too. Anybody that came and ring the doorbell had to come up. Yeah, they put a gun on them, come up, and that included a lot of resistance people, of course. But we also had somebody that was delivering some coal, you know, for the stove, with his son. Yeah, and they came to just deliver coal. They had to come up, and they were killed in the camp. They had nothing to do with anything. They were just delivering some stuff. So innocent people were also
At the
just
wrong time and the
wrong time. Father and son. Yeah. So, and the only person that was allowed to leave was my grandmother, my mother's mother. I don't know what age she was at the time, but maybe only in the 60s. No, I don't know what she was, but you know. And we had a dog. We had an Airedale, a dog, which we barely kept alive during the food.
Dog. Airedale's a big dog.
We didn't have much food to start with, but we kept them alive. And she was allowed to take the dog and leave. And she went to my father's sister's house, where she took the dog, and they kept the dog, of course, and so the dog was safe. Which we didn't know, of course, what happened after she left. But later on, we found out, of course, what had happened. So, but we were all for 3 days. They posted in the house. The Germans were there, and anybody that came at the door was being incarcerated. Yeah, just round up. And then we were all taken down to the prison in Scheveningen, which is called Hotel Oranje Hotel, which is the big prison there. I think Milosevic or somebody was also there because we have the big courthouse there in Holland. You know, the World Court is there. So the prison was used for, I think it was Milosevic or something. That his name. But anyway, the prison was still active. You know. So we and you know the rest of the story that we went from there. Yeah.
Theo, I want to thank you very much. It's very good.
Is that good?
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm going to stop it.